time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's Prosperity Party won a decisive victory in the country's parliamentary elections held on the 1st of June. The party secured 438 of the 486 seats in the House of People's Representatives, strengthening its majority in the legislature. The Prosperity Party entered the election as the overwhelming favourite in the nation of about 130 million people, facing a fragmented opposition that failed to field candidates in many constituencies. And for more on this, we are joined on the line by political analyst Dr. Shingai Mutizwa-Mangiza. Dr. Mangiza, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
No, good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Now, were these results expected, just given that the opposition parties either boycotted the elections or just failed to field candidates in numerous constituencies? And how much did this contribution to the ruling parties, did this contribute to the ruling party's overwhelming victory?
Yes, I think we would say that by and large, I think there was an expectation that the government would secure a landslide. I think there may have been disagreements as to just how big that landslide was, but I think all reports were that the government was going to secure a fairly large majority. Now, of course, in the lead up to this election, there were a number of concerns. One was, of course, questions surrounding the degree to which the electoral environment would be free and fair. There were reports of intimidation among opposition leaders, arrests, crackdown, etc., intimidation of voters. And so there's a sense that perhaps the degree to which the election, at least on those grounds, would not be entirely free and fair. This, of course, may have had implications in terms of possibly discouraging people from voting on the one hand. But I think having said that, we cannot overlook the fact that the opposition was largely very fragmented. They were not able to unify around a single candidate. And so I think that partially, also contributed, to the win of the, of the Prosperity Party led by Prime Minister Ahmed, Abiy Ahmed Ali. However, I think to add to that point, we cannot also discount the fact that perhaps part of the electoral victory may be hinged or predicated on the economic performance. I think in recent years, the Ethiopian economy has been growing at more or less 9.8%. It was able to acquire or to, its revenue base was able to increase to about 8.3 billion. This was on account of the liberalization of the currency, which made imports more costly and the exports more attractive. So I think, and again, inflation being lowered from 30% to single-digit level, all of these things may have, been appealing and may have contributed to his electoral victory. But I think largely we can also throw in the mix, the incumbents' bias. I think we have seen that in most elections, incumbents usually have the advantage of one, access to information, one, they have, access to government machinery through which they are able to penetrate the entire territory. So I think we can attribute his victory to a number of things. But as I said, I don't think it was all the while unexpected that this landslide majority would be attained.
Now, critics have raised concerns about political freedoms and the electoral environment. How credible and inclusive was this election process?
Well, as I said, one was there's two issues here. One, there's been this issue of a crackdown on certain opposition members of the opposition. There were reports of certain arrests that were taking place, and so that called into question the degree, of course, in terms of the participation. To what extent could ordinary aspirants participate in the election? So there's that issue. The second issue has to do with the exclusion of certain regions. We've seen um, in Tigrinya, we have seen in Amhara and even parts of Oromia that the election had not actually taken place. The National Ethiopian Electoral Board had cited that security concerns and the idea that these regions may not have been conducive yet to host elections. So that's what has been cited. But on the other side, there is also the idea that 143 polling stations were also closed, which also kind of deprived access to a key number of voters. So I think by and large, whilst I think the African Union observation mission led by Uhuru Kenyatta, whilst it did not, of course, come out and pronounce, it did not really cite any irregularities. It didn't. It really pronounced more on the technical aspects of the election. It didn't really pronounce on the degree to whether the election itself was free or fair. But it just it was a bit more circumspect in citing a few issues here and there, but it really did not come out to give the full stamp, should I say, of legitimacy in the in the way that would have been expected. But at the same time, it did not condemn it. Again, I think similar reports from the other observation missions um, were critical, but at the same time stopped short of condemning the election as being, as not being free and fair. I think the
Just for
fact that
interest's sake,
many of
why do we always get that from observer missions? What is the biggest issue from with regards to observation missions not being you know truthful, so to speak?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think one of the factors is the fact that, elections by their very nature are political affairs. Again, when we're talking of politics, you cannot talk of people, you cannot talk of the parties as being entirely disinterested. And this is not just in the case of the participants. We're talking at the level of observers. This, of course, has broader implications, right? In as far as the engagement with foreign partners, etc., many of whom are going to be relying on these reports to make determinations as to whether to recognize or to not recognize the election, etc. And so there is this contestation and jockeying that takes place, between them. But of course, there has been this tendency, I think, in recent years, if I may digress a little bit. I think people will remember in the contentious 2013 election in Kenya, there was a statement that was made by the then High Commission, the then ambassador to Kenya, that elections, choices have consequences. And so, as I said, this idea of there being a disinterested party on the part of observers of the election, I think we can dispense with that idea. And so I think it's always going to be contentious, these electoral observation reports, how they're written, because at the end of the day, they have very direct implications, as I said, as to how into the international community, particularly the donor community, are going to respond and interact, in the aftermath of the election.
Now, does the size of the Prosperity Party's majority strengthen governance, or does it risk weakening parliamentary oversight?
I think to a degree it does risk weakening parliamentary oversight. I think to the extent that the opposition remains fragmented. I think perhaps again to the extent that if dissent, if they continue, if they if the hard line against dissent continues, then oversight becomes increasingly difficult. I think one of the main challenges or concerns that may be there are now that the Prosperity Party and Prime Minister Ahmed have secured this huge landslide. Um, is there going to be an attempt to consolidate power further? Will this mean any significant changes constitutionally? Will there be attempts to transform the country from a parliamentary republic into a presidential republic? In which case, Prime Minister Ahmed becomes an executive president with who's head of government and head of state. Again, what does this mean for the other regions like Tigrinya and Oromo? I mean, we understand that there is quite a bit of anxiety, at the moment, as it stands following this, and there are some concerns that there may be a regression into conflict, which no one wants at this particular point in time. And so I think the concerns on oversight are definitely well placed, and I would hope, I think the hope would be that you know in light of these concerns, not just domestically, but also I think from from the international community, uh, you know, the possible descent of into conflict again, I think would not bode well for Ethiopia and also for the broader IGAD region. I think it's also a very delicate situation there, with Somalia, and again, you know, with what's been happening, largely within that region. So I think concerns are definitely there that this, if not handled properly, if governance is not handled properly, this could possibly lead to another descent into conflict.
Dr. Mangiza, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for today.
Conversations are happening, and Channel Africa is at the heart